All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our Aquarium's Online Academy. My name is Talia. I'm from our education department here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, and today I'm really excited to be joining you today in front of our jelly exhibit. But that's kind of one of the friends we're going to be talking about today are jellies and other type of plankton. During our program today, I would love to interact with you. If you have any questions today, if you see something during our program and you go, I want to know a little bit more about that, or if you have any observations, I am happy to receive them. And you can do that a couple of ways, depending on when you're watching this program. If you're watching this live Friday morning at 10 o'clock, we have a text line. So you can text us in your questions to this number right down below, right on your screen. So 562-286-1838. If you're watching this as we are currently airing, if you're watching it after we're airing, or if you have any questions later on, you can email us those questions instead, and that email address is right below the number. It is right there, live at lbaop.org. So those are two ways to interact with us depending on when you're watching. So I want to take a moment and let's make some observations about our awesome jelly exhibit behind me. This is probably I love our lighting in this exhibit too, because you can really see all the yellow of the jellies' bodies here. But let's take a moment to make some observations about our jellies here. But I also want to start off by asking a really basic question, and let's try to figure out what plankton is. I said that word earlier, something else we're going to be discovering a little bit more about today. So let's try to figure out what is plankton. When you hear the word plankton, what do you think about? What kind of ideas or images come to your mind? So I'm going to give you guys a moment to make some observations. I'm going to get out of the way of our jellies so you can see more awesome jellies. And let's see what we can discover about our plankton and jelly friends. So I really noticed, especially in our exhibit here, we're kind of viewing them from the top looking down. I definitely noticed that they're moving in a really interesting way, for sure. Whoa, big jelly just came by the camera there. Especially for our jellies, you probably noticed they have really long, stringy bits to them too, besides that bell that kind of moves and moves and moves. All right, so here comes another jelly right by the camera there. All right, what do we think? Again, you're welcome to text in those questions or observations. We have, I am not alone here in the studio. I do have some friends to help me out. So Miss Stacy is over at a computer fielding all your questions to me. I also have Miss Carrie by another computer, and she's changing all the magic behind me. So I like to think about, when I'm first starting to think about jellies, especially if I'm trying to think about the word plankton. A lot of times when I think about plankton, or what the image that would come to mind, we tend to think about something really small, right? And there's definitely a lot of plankton that's really small. Maybe we think of little krill, a little shrimp that whale likes to eat, or little, even smaller than that, because a krill can get about the size of your thumb, maybe your fingernail to your knuckle. Krill can actually be really, you can see it with your eye. But there's some plankton that's even smaller than that. And I think a lot of times when we're thinking about that word, or maybe you're thinking about a friend from a cartoon, you're thinking about something that's really, 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 really tiny. But I think one of the cool things about plankton is, while there is definitely a lot of small plankton out there, plankton really refers to how the animal is moving. So here's some other more smaller microscopic plankton. If this looks familiar to you, you might recognize this friend from a cartoon. So the plankton that's in SpongeBob is actually based off of a real plankton called a copepod, which is what you're seeing in our image right here. So plankton basically means that you are drifting with the water. You are, we got a lot of motion of the ocean right now. Hold on, I'm going to get myself stabilized here. Okay, so plankton basically means that you are going with the flow. You are going with the motion of the ocean, and you can't really go against the current. So let's do an example of that. So if I turn myself into a Talia jelly, and I was floating in the water, I'm going to do my very best to be a very good jelly here. If I was floating in the water here, and the water was going this way, could I go that way? I would have to go this way. So I would have to go with the flow, and Talia Jelly would have to float over here. Oh, I have so many jelly friends now. Let's see. So let's think about that again. So if I'm Talia Jelly and the water is going that way, can I go this way? So Talia Jelly has to go with the flow and head off that way towards the current. I'm going to go get myself back into view so you guys can see me. All right, I'm going to turn myself back into regular old Talia and no more Talia Jelly. But that is the way that plankton can move. So let's take a look back at our jellies here. Are they kind of going with the flow too? Our flow here, I think our exhibitor, our flow kind of goes round and round and round like that. You can kind of see that our jellies here are kind of going round and round and round too. So even though jellies are really, really big in terms of maybe the picture we have in our head when we think about plankton, jellies are actually plankton as well. So I think that's something cool, that something pretty big can be considered plankton. Now, are all plankton the same? Because we saw a couple different types of plankton. We saw our jellies. We saw a little bit when we were looking at our little microscope friends too. And there's actually two types of plankton out there, or two kind of categories you can place them in. It kind of depends a little bit about how they eat. So maybe you've thought about this with other animals, other organisms before. You have things like carnivores that eat meat. You have things like herbivores or vegetarians that eat plankton. Or excuse me, not eat plankton, eat plants. I'm thinking of too many words that start with the letter P today. So there are different categories of plankton as well. So one of those types of plankton are called zooplankton. And you spell that Zooplankton. So the start of that word kind of gives you a clue about what type of plankton that animal is. It kind of sounds like it's starting with the word zoo. What kind of things do we find in a zoo? Do we find pizza at the zoo? Maybe for a snack, but like you're not going to go to the zoo to go see pizza on exhibit. I got it. At the zoo, do you see lots of beautiful gardens and flowers and trees? Maybe not so much. Do you see... Do you see tigers at the zoo? Ooh, and lions and bears? Oh my. You see lots of animals at the zoo, right? So a zooplankton is a type of plankton that's considered an animal plankton. So our jelly friends here would be considered a type of animal plankton. And then the opposite of that is phytoplankton. So if that sounds similar to maybe something you're learning about in school, maybe you've heard of a big word called photosynthesis before. Phytoplankton is a type of plankton that is a plant plankton. So that is the type of kind of the base of the food chain, actually. So you have all these little plant plankton. They're going to act just like plants do on land. They're going to get their energy from the sun. Drop my mic. I was so excited to talk about the sun, my microphone fell off my face. But that's okay. So plant planktons get their energy from the sun. They're going to make their own food, photosynthesize, and kind of go off of that. And then they're the base of what we call a food chain or a food web. So you have different organisms eating each other as you go up and up the food chain. So to give you an example of that, if you had, let's say, you had a field of grass. So you have a field of grass. The cow is going to eat the grass. And then, I lost my train of thought. Cow's going to eat the grass. And then maybe the cow is going to turn into a hamburger. And then a human's going to eat the hamburger. That's an example of a food chain. I'll think of a better example next time. But the plant plankton is kind of the base of that. So it's really, really important to the ocean because a lot of times zooplankton, animal plankton, is going to be eating off of the the plant plankton. And then that's going to go up and up and up and up the food chain. So if something happens to the bottom, then all the other animals that depend on that, they might run into some problems. So that's one of the reasons that plankton is super important. Another thing, thinking about plants and what plants provide us here on land, is we get a lot of oxygen from plants. A lot of times we think about trees and big forests and big rainforests giving us oxygen as well. The plant plankton in the ocean, they do the same thing as well. So they're actually providing a lot of the oxygen. Whoa, big jelly just came by the camera here. Oh my goodness. So plant plankton is going to provide a lot of the oxygen that we breathe. So I think they've termed it as about 3 out of every 4 breaths you take can oxygen produced in the ocean. So I think that's incredible that it's really helping us out with making sure that we have oxygen to breathe. So super duper important. So my friends, I think we're going to take a turn here and we are going to go take a closer look at some jellies, since that is the other topic of our program today. So we're kind of looking at our West Coast sea nettles here. And again, if you guys have any questions, any observations to share, you guys are welcome to text those questions in. Again, that number is right down there below on your screen, 562-286-1838. So let's take a closer look at our jellies. We were kind of looking a little bit about how they move. You mentioned that I'll get out of the way so you guys can check out their movement a little bit more. We were talking a little bit about how they go with the flow. So they're not the greatest of swimmer. That bell, this is this part of the body. You can think like you're ringing a bell. The bell here does give them some motion forward, but again, that motion is still not strong enough to go against the current of the ocean. So they do have muscles, a series of muscles in this part of their body that allows them to sort of make that pulsing motion. And we mentioned also they have those long stringy bits here. So they have tentacles, and they actually have 2 types of things here, right? So they have these long strings, which are tentacles, but then they also have these kind of fluffy, frilly bits here. And these are one of the things that helps the jelly eat. So a jelly is in a group of animals called cnidarians, and they're known for having stinging cells. So you might have heard, oh, you don't want to touch jelly because the jelly might sting you. So that's how they get their food. They use a series of stinging cells that are along these long stringy bits. They're going to kind of drift into their food, use those stinging cells to, here's a great picture of another type of, no, this might be a purple striped jelly. It's the West Coast sea nettle. Never mind. It's just a beautiful picture of it. So they're going to use these long, stringy tentacles to sting their food, make sure that it kind of stays still. And then they're going to use these very, very frilly ones to help them get that food from wherever they caught it up to their mouth. So these are called oral arms, these long, kind of frillier bits. They're a little bit thicker. And then these long, stringy ones, these are where all the stinging cells are. So they're going to bring it up to their mouth, which is kind of just in the center of their body. They don't have a mouth like us, so you're not looking for teeth or little fangs or anything like that. They're just going to have a hole, and they're going to put the food in there, and then they're going to digest it. Another one of our types of jellies actually has multiple stomachs to do that. So you might have, if you've ever visited here in our aquarium in Long Beach, you might have seen that we have moon jellies here. And moon jellies actually have 4 stomachs. They have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think it's always, and some of them might have a little bit more, a little bit less. I think it's always the same capacity, but it's kind of broken up into 4 different sections there. You can imagine if you had 4 stomachs, what would you fill your 4 stomachs with? I'd have to think about that hard. I think one of them would definitely be chocolate and dessert. That would definitely be one capacity for a stomach. And then maybe some of my other favorite foods could pick up the others. I would definitely have a breakfast stomach for sure. Maybe breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and dessert. That sounds like a good plan for my 4 stomachs here. So yeah, they all fill their 4 stomachs with all their food, and they're going to eat plankton. Essentially, that's smaller than them. So here at the aquarium, we feed them baby brine shrimp. And actually, I think you might even be able to see. I'm not sure if these are some babies kind of hanging out in front of the camera here, or they might have some food kind of getting up in their stomach. Sometimes they're messy eaters and their bell gets kind of covered on the inside with shrimp, and then eventually they're going to use those oral arms to kind of sweep the sides and make sure that it gets up into their mouth and they're able to digest it. Now, looking at this picture, I do notice that there are some baby jellies in here too. So I'm not sure if we have a ton of images available to look at the life cycle of the jelly, but I'll point out here that this is a younger jelly. I think that they look like a little bit of a flower. So these jellies have a really interesting life cycle, and that there are boy and girl jellies. So they're going to release their gametes into the water. They're going to combine there, form a little egg. Egg's going to go around, and then they decide, you know what? I'm kind of tired of swimming for a bit. I'm going to take a break. And then they do this very interesting thing. So this kind of looks a little bit like a jelly's cousin almost. It almost looks like a sea anemone, if you're familiar with that from maybe some tide pools or from maybe even movies like Finding Nemo. A clownfish live in an anemone as well. So they kind of settle on the bottom, and then they start making pancake stacks of themselves. So this is no longer one jelly here. These are a whole bunch of jellies all in this one little structure. You can see one kind of wiggling right there, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my goodness. So you have a lot of jellies all stacked up on top of each other. So what they're essentially doing is they're actually making copies of themselves. They're actually making clones of themselves. This is all genetically the same jelly that's made a copy on top of 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 a copy. And then eventually these little guys are going to wiggle enough to pop off, and then they're going to be that little flower-looking friend that we saw in that earlier picture. That's called an aphyra. And then eventually that little flowery-looking jelly is going to slowly start changing its shape. It's going to fill in a little bit more in terms of the bell. It's going to get those nice, long, stringy tentacles there. And then, so there's the aphyra there. There's that younger version of the jellies. And eventually they're going to kind of change their shape a good couple of times and become an adult moon jelly like you see in the foreground here. I do see that I have a question coming in. I have a question asking, where do jellies live? Oh my goodness, that's an excellent question. I believe they can live in just about most oceans. Maybe not, I would say maybe not the top and the bottom, maybe not where it's too cold. Maybe. Oh, okay. I got some confirmation from some of my my colleagues here, and they say that, yeah, they actually might be able to live in the top and the bottom. Because we have things like corals really deep, too, in the ocean, too, that can live in some really cold water. Yeah, so I'm going to say they probably live in most oceans. So that's one of the cool things about jellies as well, is you have them all over the place. You have all sorts of different types of jellies, anywhere from the ones that we're seeing here, which are a little bit more local here to our waters here in California. But you can find moon jellies, I think, almost all over the world as well. And there's jellies that are really small. There's jellies that are super big. I think the biggest one can get, I think that's a lion's mane jelly, can get like as big as a person. I've seen a picture of like a scuba diver next to a jelly, and they're almost the same size. I think the jelly actually won a little bit, and it was actually even a little bit longer than that. So you can definitely find jellies all over the world for sure. And again, if you guys have any more questions, please feel free to text them in. I'm happy to answer questions. If you have anything you've been wondering about either plankton or jellies, feel free to text those questions into that number down below on your screen. So we talked a little bit about jellies, how jellies move. We talked a little bit about how jellies eat. We talked about a little bit about their life cycle, which I think is super cool. I love that they change their shape so many times. They do that weird little copy pancake stack of themselves. I think that's a really interesting thing about jellies. One question I do get sometimes about jellies is sometimes people wonder, do jellies have eyes? Because if you're looking at a jelly, I don't really see a face on our jelly very, very much. I don't really see a nose or a big smiley face or anything like that. So a lot of times I like to think of jellies as being simple but complicated. Because they kind of have eyes, but it's not eyes like us. They don't have eyeballs sitting on top. They have little spots around the edge of their body here, and they're called, I think you can kind of see them maybe at these little points here. So they have these little spots all around the edge of their bell here, and they're called ocelli. So they're really simple eyes. They just basically see the difference between light and shadow. So to give an idea of kind of what that maybe looks like to a jelly, if you kind of look at a light and you close your eyes, you can kind of still see that there's light in front of you. But if you put your hand in front of your eyes, you can kind of tell the difference between when your hand's in front of your eyes and when it's not in front of your eyes with your eyes closed there. So that's kind of what the jelly is seeing, is a difference between light and shadow, and that's how they kind of navigate the world a little bit. Now, remember I said they're simple, but they're complicated because they're doing all of this. They're moving, they're kind of seeing, they're eating, they're doing this without really having a lot of kind of centralized systems. They don't have a brain, they don't have a heart. They basically have things that are a little bit simpler than what we think of in our own body. So they have a kind of a net of nerves, and that's kind of helping them kind of function and have those muscles move and stuff. And they're getting a lot of their kind of exchanges of fluids and stuff through their skin instead of having something pump through their body like a heart. So I think jellies are definitely a very, very, very interesting animal that we find drifting in our oceans. Another thing to think about with jellies, because I mentioned, and plankton in general, is that I mentioned that jellies kind of change their form as they move through their life, right? So this is not what a baby jelly starts out looking like. And different animals can actually start as plankton and change into something else. So not only do we think about plankton sometimes in terms of, again, how they move, but also in terms of kind of where they are. Ooh, that's a good question too. I'm going to answer that in just a moment. In terms of a part of an animal's or an organism's life can be considered planktonic. So you can have things like a fish that eventually could be considered a plankton in an earlier stage of its life. Same thing with something like a sea star. A sea star actually starts out as a little plankton, and then it eventually settles, and again, similar to the jelly, it's going to change its shape a couple of times and eventually turn into the sea star that we know. Sea urchins actually are super cool when they are in their little planktonic stage. They look like a little moon lander. They look like a little spaceship flying around, and then they flip inside out and start eventually looking a little bit more like a sea urchin. So that's another cool thing to think about with plankton. It's not just the ones that stay plankton all the time, like our jellies, but there are some animals that start their life as plankton and eventually change into something else. I do have another question coming in as well, and the question is, what animals eat jellyfish? Ooh, that is a fantastic question. So the one that I can think of right off the bat is definitely one of their favorite foods is a sea turtle. A sea turtle loves to eat jellies. That's definitely one of its favorite foods. It tends to eat a lot of squishy things, so it might be eat some sponges and things like that as well, but definitely loves to eat jellies, which is a problem sometimes if you have something. You've heard the stories of we want to make sure that plastic bags don't get into the ocean, because if a plastic bag is floating in the water, that might look a whole lot like a jelly. And that can, obviously, if the turtle eats that plastic bag, they're not going to be able to eat that. So that's not very good for the turtle. So that's definitely one good reason we want to make sure that plastic bags get disposed of in a proper way, or even better, having reusable bags instead. So yeah, sea turtles definitely loves to eat jellies. Humans can eat jellies too. You can actually have kind of a jellyfish salad. I haven't eaten it myself, so I'm not quite sure what it tastes like, but I've heard it's more texture than flavor in and of itself. It kind of tastes like what you dress it in terms of like the salad. So that is some of the animals that eat jellies. Another great question. Could a jelly sting another jelly? Would they feel it? That's a fantastic question. So we talked about the stingers. I don't think I talked really about what that looks like. So if you like zoomed in on where those little stinging cells are, it kind of looks like a little capsule, and inside there's a little like harpoon, so a little sharp point with kind of a rope attached to it, and then that fires out when it's triggered and sticks into something, and that's how a jelly would sting something. So I believe they can sting each other. I want to say they might have some tolerance to their own sting or to the sting of a different species of jelly. But yeah, I think maybe if it was a jelly versus another jelly, they might be able to feel each other's. That's true. So my friend Stacy reminded me that some jellies, even that's another animal that eats jellies, is other jellies. I forgot about that. So I'm glad I have my colleagues here to help me field some questions. Yeah. So yeah, even jellies, some jellies can eat other jellies too. So yeah, there's definitely some cases where they're not going to be immune to their sting, and they're definitely going to feel it. So, and then you might. Ooh, that's another good point. Speaking of stings and jellies, is that there's a difference in terms of the strength of that sting, right? So there's some jellies, at least to us humans, that we consider having mild stings. And that's why you can have things like touchfuls with moon jellies in it, because they do sting, but their sting is not strong enough to get to, at least through human fingers. And even there's some other jellies in the tropics, I think called lagoon jellies, that people go like snorkeling with too. So it depends on the type of jelly. Ooh, like this friend. Thank you. This is what a lagoon jelly looks like. They're super cute. They kind of bob a little bit more. I feel like they have a much shorter pulse to them. They're pretty fun. They all have these fun little frilly tentacles instead. So yeah, people can go swimming with these and they're going to be okay. And that just depends on the strength of the sting and then how thick whatever it's trying to get through. So in terms of human fingers, we're good for touching moon jellies. But in general, if you see a jelly out in the wild, you probably want to give it some space because you might not know exactly what type of jelly it is. Even if it washes up on the beach, that stinging reaction that I was talking about, that little harpoon firing out, that is touch triggered. So even if they're on the beach, they still might have the ability to sting. So definitely want to give jelly some space in the wild. But if you're at something like an aquarium where we know for sure, yep, that's totally okay to be in a touch pool. Those are some different situations. Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, keep those questions coming in. If you guys have any last questions, we do have a couple more minutes with you to talk about different types of jellies. And again, you can use that text number right down there below. We've got a few more moments. All right, so let's see. I'm going to go think about something else to talk about with our jellies. So, we talked a little bit about how they move. We talked a little bit about how they eat. We talked a little bit about their life cycle. Ooh, another just random thing to talk about, because we mentioned that jellies go with the flow. So how would you take care of a jelly in an aquarium? So you might notice sometimes that different aquariums, a lot of times when you have a jelly exhibit, that jelly exhibit is going to be round. Maybe it's going to be kind of round. You're not going to really find a whole lot of octagon jelly exhibits. And that's because, again, they are going with the water flow that's in that exhibit. So if you have a nice round shape, that's going to help them not kind of catch up in the corners or anything like that. So that's something to notice. Maybe next time you're at an aquarium, like either ours here in Long Beach or around the world, try to look at the jelly exhibits and see if that helps them with them being plankton and drifting with the water. So I'll give you guys a moment to observe the jellies just a little bit more. See if we can make any more observations. Ooh, here's something I did mention that we do have boy and girl jellies here. So sometimes it's hard to tell who's a boy and who's a girl. I do know that, at least for like when I'm looking at our moon jellies, one way to definitely know it's a girl is that if it does have eggs. So every once in a while, if you look closely, I don't think any of ours have any eggs here, but sometimes when you're looking at jellies and you're looking at these frilly bits, you're looking at these oral arms here, sometimes you'll see something extra on them. It kind of looks almost like they have kind of lace on the edge of those frills of the oral arms. Whoa! And those would be the eggs. So that's one way to try to see if the jelly you're looking at, is it a boy? Is it a girl? If it has eggs, it is most definitely a girl. If it doesn't, it might just be a girl without eggs, or it might be a boy. So yeah, I think it's a little hard to tell boy jellies from girl jellies just by looking at them. But if they have eggs, that's a good way to definitely make sure you're looking. And a girl jelly. So we are just about out of time. So I want to thank you guys very much for spending a little bit of your morning talking about jellies and plankton with me. Again, if you have any more questions after our program has concluded, you're welcome to email those questions instead. And that is right down there below on your screen live at lbaop.org. Oh, thank you. And if there are any teachers watching, make sure if you could text us in the number of students that are watching with you, that would be great, just so we can better gauge our numbers and better serve our community. So you're welcome to use that text line right down there below, teacher friends, to let us know how many number of students you have with you. Again, if you have any more questions after our program concluded, you can use that email address to send in any more questions. But thank you so much for joining us this morning, and have a good rest of your day. Bye, everybody.